Welcome to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat. My guest today is Kainat Azhar. Kainat is a Pakistani American Muslim. She has always been interested in the various experiences of religion and culture and the roles that they play in a person's life. An avid reader and writer, Kainat loves exploring the complexities of relationships and emotions through her work. She primarily writes fiction, but enjoys writing poetry as well, when not immersed in a book or animatedly typing stories on her laptop. Kainat can be found passionately studying, obsessively eating noodles, or wishfully adding new destinations to her travel bucket list. Welcome, Kainat. Please tell us a little more about yourself and your novel, Journey to Hidayah.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So, a little bit about me. I'm 21. I'm a senior at Rutgers University, and I'm double majoring in English and psychology. I'm set to graduate this spring, so in May. So, that's pretty exciting. So Journey to Hidayah is my debut novel, right? And in a nutshell, it's a novel about a character's journey towards establishing a connection with her faith after having multiple bad experiences and past traumas associated with it. And this journey is kind of facilitated by someone who applies for work at her company, who she eventually ends up falling in love with. So that's kind of the gist of it. And so this is a project I've worked on for 3 years before it was published, and it was kind of brewing in my mind for even longer than that. And so I think it's safe to say that I put my heart and soul into this book. So a lot of the ideas and the topics that are covered in it kind of stem from my personal frustrations about a lack of realistic representation of South Asians and Muslims in the media and in the entertainment industry. And I wanted to be a part of changing that narrative, more often than not, that incorrect and stereotypical narrative. And so I'm not a very outspoken or verbal person. I'm kind of terrified of public speaking, but I felt like with this book, I felt like I had a message and I was inspired to tell it to the world. So I did it through a medium that I'm comfortable and self assured in, which is writing.
Okay. Um, I understand the being a bit of an introvert, shy. Totally understand. So being in this platform, both of us, we're doing pretty good to be able to communicate, and it is a little bit of a safer environment. Um,
Mhm.
can you share something about Journey to Hidayah that isn't in the blurb?
Yeah, so I guess the blurb touches on the central aspect of the story, which is again Zoya's journey, establishing that connection with her faith and with God. And everything in the novel is kind of directly or indirectly related to this personal endeavor. I think maybe some of the things that are not super apparent from the blurb is that the main character, she's very witty, very funny, very unflinching. She's bold and brazen, and there's a lot of comedy involved in the novel because of her the personality that she has, and it kind of makes for a gossip girl kind of vibe. And there's also a lot of discussion on perceptions of different kind of perceptions of feminism and masculinity, um, topics such as child neglect, domestic violence, things like that. So, yes, the novel centers around Zoya's journey towards her faith, but all of these concepts are involved in that journey and help shape the person that she is and the worldviews that she develops.
Okay. Um, in a recent article, your book was described as Journey to Hidayah delves into profound themes such as domestic violence, mental health, femininity, spiritual reawakening, blind faith, and the perils of harmful attitudes within faith based communities. Can you feel the list? Do you feel the list covers the main themes in your book?
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good and comprehensive description of a lot of the faith-based themes and the other larger themes discussed in the novel. There's also, I guess, discussion of like empowerment and what it means to be empowered, different definitions of empowerment, as well as discussions of romantic attachments, emotional attachments, spiritual attachments, and kind of just the exploration of the psychology of a human being. But I think that the things that you listed, that's a very comprehensive list of topics covered in the novel.
For you, what do you think makes a good story when you start to write, or when you start to write your story, or even when you look for a book that you're going to read for pleasure?
So I think this is a hard one because I think the cliche answer would be to say that anything that's enjoyable or kind of hooks your attention. But I think as an author myself, that's not always the case, and there's a little bit more that tends to be involved. I think that any story that moves you, that makes you feel something, whether it's a desire to change, whether it's happiness, contentment, anger, frustration, sadness, whatever emotion it may be, positive or negative, I think if a story really touches your heart, that's really telling of what kind of story it is. And I guess other than that, the kind of cookie cutter aspects of a good story would be things like skilled writing, a comprehensive and developed plot, well fleshed out characters. I think something that's important to me is characters I can sympathize with and understand and connect with. Um, yeah, and things like that.
What are you currently working on?
So I'm very sporadic in terms of my work. I have like many different projects that I work on at a moment. But sometimes it's like if one project is frustrating me, or if I've hit writer's block with it, or if I can't figure a plot point out, then I switch to something else or like another project. And that's kind of usually how it goes. But I think there's three major things that I'm working on right now. One is a novella about a woman who is trying to understand what it means to be brave. Her name means brave, but she feels like she never can live up to that name. So it's kind of an exploration of what bravery means to her. The second is a poetry book, which I'm very excited about. I love poetry. And the third is a novel about a girl trying to cope with the grief of losing her oldest brother to a car accident and attempting to recalibrate after that incident kind of destroys her family.
And do you think that that would be more like adult or YA, or would you put that last story idea?
Yeah, so the last one, it's actually the protagonist is 18, so it would be YA. But it's also I think a lot of the themes in it could be considered NA as well. I know that's kind of the boundary between those two gets blurred sometimes. But I think in terms of the age of the character, it would fall into YA.
Age-wise, yes. As a person who buys for the library, oftentimes my colleagues in the that buy for young adult and I buy the same book because
Uh-huh.
and that's great. And people do for a long time now. Will seek books in the YA collection,
Mhm.
even as adults. It's just the storylines are um, really good and
Yeah.
open to all age groups. Um, what do you hear from your readers, about have you heard from them about, Journey to Hidayah, and, like, what kinds of things have they said to you?
Yeah, so I hear from my readers all the time actually. I'm really active on Instagram and a lot of people reach out to me there and on Wattpad as well, which is where I first started publishing the novel. And honestly, they're the sweetest people ever. I couldn't appreciate them enough. Um, Especially when they reach out saying things like your book changed my life or your book brought me closer to my faith or like the Muslim representation in your book is amazing, which is, like, really gratifying because that was one of my goals, so things like that truly make my day and remind me why I write what I write.
That sounds great. That sounds like really wonderful feedback from,
Mhm.
your readers. Um, so we're gonna change our attention from the actual book to your writing. You did mention, your double major, so, I assume the English, you're writing a lot for
Mhm.
your,
Oh, yeah.
educationally. Um, so what inspired you to start writing?
So I feel like as far as I can remember, I've been writing ever since I was able to hold a pencil. Like I can't remember a time that I wasn't writing. I do have one vivid memory in elementary school of one of my teachers. What we would do, this was English class, we would sit in a circle. So she would be sitting on a chair and we would all be on the floor in front of her, and she would read us a book, and I remember specifically Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. She would pass around chocolates to everybody and read it, and we would all just sit there staring at her, like, wide-eyed and mesmerized and feeling, like, magical and invincible, and I love that stories can make you feel that way, like an escape from the world, so I guess that's part of it, knowing that putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, can transport you to another world.
What in your life do you consider was a major influence in your writing?
Yeah, so I guess just to reiterate, English, I would say I think definitely my English classes, throughout both my K through 12 education and my college years, especially in college, almost every English class I've taken has been memorable in some way and has made me kind of fall in love with reading and writing even more.
Most authors that I talk to will always tend to have certain parts of the writing experience that they say is the most difficult. What would you say is the most difficult for you?
Yeah, so I hitting writer's block, definitely. Because even when your writing is bad, or even when it needs tons of work, or even when it seems irredeemable, at least you're still writing. When you hit writer's block, I think it's the worst feeling ever because even while wanting to continue to write, you're simply unable to. And then that kind of coupled with, I'm sure a lot of writers experience imposter syndrome, not just writers, but artists in any way experience some kind of imposter syndrome one way or another. So I think definitely writer's block would be the biggest one for me.
Okay. Um, I've heard that. I've often
I'm sure you
often
have.
heard editing. A lot of authors
Oh
just
yeah.
like the editing process. Um, and how long did it take you to write the book? And do you have a writing routine?
So it took me 1 year to write the book, and then 1 year to edit it, and then send it to editors and work with their feedback, and then about 6 months to kind of publish it. So, like I mentioned, I'm pretty sporadic with my writing. I don't really have like a set schedule or routine. I kind of just tend to write whenever or wherever. I know that it tends to be recommended for writers to have a schedule or a word count or some kind of goal in mind and to plan ahead. But me personally, I feel like that gives me a little bit of anxiety and makes me feel kind of confined and hinders my creativity. I'm also more of a writing pantser than planner. I tend not to make outlines or anything like that. My story kind of figures itself out as I go. I have noticed though recently that I've started to just for my own like brainstorming purposes and stuff like that to just look up templates where I can write down things like beginning, middle, end, climax, build up, resolution, all of that, just so I can visualize my story in a different way.
The Hope answer, I know, sometimes requires some editing, a little more editing to make sure that the story flows.
Mhm.
But most people say that they're this kind of blend of the two,
Right.
a plotter and a answer. Um, how long after you completed your manuscript was it before it was published?
So if you don't count the editing phase, then about 2 years, but if you count that whole editing phase, then about 6 months afterwards it was published. So as you mentioned, like editing definitely takes up a lot of a writer's life.
Yes, yes. Um, what was your publishing journey? How did who are you published? Who published you? That's my
So I published through Amazon KDP.
okay.
So that took just as a first time writer and first time like published author, that in itself just took tons of research and figuring out because the publishing world I think is very daunting and cutthroat sometimes. So just navigating that whole world was pretty intimidating.
Okay. And what was the most surprising thing you learned in publishing your book?
Hey, this is gonna sound funny, but I was honestly shocked by how expensive ISBNs are. I It's like when you read a book, you don't really as a reader, you look to the back and you don't even pay attention to ISBNs, but, like, it's so important, like, it's mandatory for every book to have,
Yes.
and then what's even more surprising is that each format of your book needs to have a separate ISBN, so I think that kind of blew my mind.
As librarians, we really looking for that ISBN, and we know. But that is how we search books. That is how
Right.
we order books. That is how we catalog a lot of books. So
Mhm.
it's a very important
I'm
number
sure
for
you
us.
do your best friends.
They are because we want, especially if you're looking for a specific book. Um,
Mhm.
are you a member of a writers group, or do you have critique partners that work with you, um, or that you work with for your writing?
So not like a formal writing group really, but, like I mentioned before about how I started publishing my novel on Wattpad, so I kind of, got familiar with, a community on there, and so just after interacting on Wattpad, we ended up making a group chat on WhatsApp, and then while I was publishing my novel, I would, ask them for advice and suggestions and feedback, so they were a huge part of, my being able to publish that novel, and then, even now, like, we'll go back to each other and just discuss things about writing and books and stuff like that. And, social media as well, I'm active on Instagram, so I get a lot of feedback from there as well.
Okay. Um, and what advice would you give to a new writer that's just starting out?
Ooh, okay, so everyone has a story to tell, and so do you. Take advice from others and be open to constructive criticism and improvement, but and I'm sure writers have made this mistake before, don't hold your writing to the standard of other people's writing for themselves. And if you're constantly vying for the approval of others in terms of your writing, excluding the editing process or anything like that, but if you're always constantly vying for the approval of others, I don't think you can ever be truly happy and comfortable with your talent. So don't be arrogant and don't refuse to hear feedback, but be confident in your abilities.
That's that's a really good one. I'm like, that's actually, yeah, one of the best ones I've heard, because that is so true. Um, they say writing is like your manuscript is like your baby, and putting your
Yeah,
baby out there to be criticized or to
yeah,
to be put down by um, editors or just readers, that's really hard to take. So,
right.
um, I mean,
And
we
then
hope
if you're
that
not
nobody
confident in your abilities, then you're gonna just fizzle out when you get that feedback.
could destroy, or
Right,
writers that are just starting out. Um,
exactly.
they hope that they have a nice team around them that are, understands that that's not the the point of critiquing.
Right.
Um, so I always end with a fun question. So for you, I'm going to ask, do you have a favorite author or book, and why is it your favorite?
Ooh, okay. I'm sure you know how difficult this question usually is for readers. Um, I think well, I have a few. I guess I'll name 3 to 4 maybe. I love Stephanie Garber. Her stories, especially the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, her stories kind of make me believe in that fairy tale kind of love. I also love Holly Black and her The Cruel Prince series. I also love kind of her writing is very different. I think it's a little bit unconventional in a good way. So I love the way that she writes. And Umaira Ahmed, she's a Pakistani writer. Her novel was a huge inspiration in writing mine. Sorry. She writes like spirituality and romance really well. So I think hard to pin down, but I think those three would be my top favorites.
The first two you mentioned, they tend to be more paranormal, fantasy, that genre. No?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, have they have well, as you mentioned, the Pakistani writer has influenced your writing. Um, How would the other two have, do you feel like they influenced your writing at all?
I think I discovered Stephanie Garber after I wrote my novel, but Holly Black, what definitely inspired me about her writing was that because I would always think that there's always a strict conventional kind of way that you're supposed to write, and it's sometimes drilled into you in school too, like this is how, for example, this is how an essay is supposed to look, and then I got into college and they're like, oh no, this is how an essay is supposed to look. So like I guess just understanding that there are different styles and methods of writing, and so Holly Black's was, I felt, very different from other writing I had stumbled across, and it kind of gave me the confidence that like you can write, you can still write really well even when your writing isn't, uh I guess, the cookie cutter writing that other people expect of you, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to say thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank
um,
you.
gone through, gone through questions, and good luck with Journey to Hidayah and also with your degree. Congratulations, a little early.
Thank you so much.
One more semester. That's super exciting.
Yeah.
Um, and what are your plans after that?
Oh god, I'm working through them.
Okay.
I'm kind of all over the place right now, but hopefully I figure it out.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much, and best of luck in your future writing with your degree and with this book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.